Okay, we have two of our Renaissance artworks that are kind of singletons. They don't really apply to the High Renaissance or the early Renaissance. So this one is considered Venetian High Renaissance because it's taking place so far from Florence and so far from Rome. This is number 80, and it's titled Venus of Urbino. The artist's name is Titian, 1538. And then there's something new here with our materials. This is our first time seeing oil and first time seeing canvas. So this is one of the things we need to know. How does this art piece change the course of art history? And this is one of the reasons. So from here on out, we're going to be seeing a lot more oil on canvas. It's going to be kind of become the standard of art making. All right, so I have this printed on here. So what I want you guys to highlight, so it says Venetian painting reached its zenith, its height, during the High Renaissance, yet its style was quite different from that of Florence and Rome. Whereas the Florentine style is based on masterful drawing, Venetian art was distinguished by a virtuoso of color, use of color. Although Venetian painters were excellent draftsmen, color and light were fundamental to their compositions. Artists in Venice had an advantage when it came to color. Because the city was a center of trade, they had access to a wide range of pigments coming from the east. Sometimes Venetian artists mixed crushed glass into their pigments. You definitely want to emphasize that part, to give their paintings a shimmering effect. Oil paints also became more common, providing luminous colors. And I know you can't tell when you look at this photograph of the painting, but this is, it's a shiny painting because of the effects or the techniques that he used. So Titian did crush glass into his pigments, and then he used oil paint, and oil paint in itself is just a more luscious, realistic looking type of paint. And then he used this technique called glazing. So he would put 10 to 15 thin transparent layers of oil paint covered in varnish. So they would layer on top of each other. So when you look at this painting, it looks like it's glowing because of these three different techniques that he did. All right, we do need to know the word chiaroscuro. Remember, that's Italian for modeling or shading. It means the treatment of light and shade in drawing and painting. So that use of chiaroscuro, he's not outlining the contours. He's not putting a line. He's blending and shading, giving, the body volume and mass. All right, so because of the fame of Titian, because this became so famous, this idea of using oil paint on canvas becomes the standard, like the norm for painters for several centuries. And you can summarize these words. You don't have to write this word for word, okay? And again, it's because of the glazing, the chiaroscuro, the mixing oil paint with ground glass, gave it this, or gives it, it still has this overall glowing effect and softness to lines. This painting is probably the most amazing painting I ever saw in real life because of those techniques. And it was something I didn't expect. All right, so you should be able to compare different techniques the artist did to achieve their artwork, right? If you look at Botticelli's artwork is beautiful, but it's very known for line, use of contour line, right? You can see lines in the body. When we look at a real body in human flesh, there are no lines. All right, now Titian did work with a master artist named Georgian, I think is this dude's name. And he kind of, got this idea of the reclining nude from Georgian, but no one really remembers that guy. We just remember Titian. All right, so Titian's master, Georgian, painted an earlier reclining nude. So you want to label that on your note page. I think I have that picture on there for you. This theme of painting reclining nudes then became very popular in sophisticated court circles because of naming her Venus. So summarize this, but this is important. So by naming the woman Venus, it's like she's cloaked by respectable classical mythology, making it acceptable for men to then look and admire her body. So it's not like they're looking at something pornographic or obscene or something naughty. They're looking at the body of a Roman god. So it's like this veil of respectability. Just title her Venus, it's fine. So this painting, Titian's painting of the reclining nude, kind of now becomes the standard for the reclining female nude and inspires these other artists to follow. So 2 of these are on our image set. This is in Impressionism, and it's Manet's Olympia. So we're going to do a lot of comparisons between these 2. That's so great. All right, so the female nude genre kind of begins in the Renaissance. All right, this one is about marriage, which seems odd. So there's symbols throughout that kind of represent what someone would want in a wife, right? The dog being one. A dog represents fidelity. That means loyalty, right? Being loyal to one person. And then domesticity, being trained to be in the house. The Cassani wedding chests are in the background. That's what's back here. So these would have been wedding gifts for a bride. And then you have a maid in the back looking down at a young girl. So that would represent motherhood. The myrtle and roses that she's holding are associated with brides. And then her gaze, her look, she seems completely at ease with the viewer, with her husband, which would also suggest familiarity. We can summarize these words. You don't have to write word for word. All right, so the function, this was painted for the Duke of Urbino's wedding. So this was a wedding gift, and this was used as a teaching model for the bride. Like, this is what you should be. Overall, telling her that she needs to represent eroticism, fidelity, and motherhood. All right, any other artwork come to mind with her pose? So the gesture of her hand kind of relates back to the modest Venus that is Botticelli's inspiration for the birth of Venus. You know, it's this idea is she covering herself, or is she bringing more attention to her sexuality? And then the artist Titian is also using the composition to bring attention to her sexuality by drawing a straight line going right to her, right in the middle. And it's something that's something I never noticed until it was pointed out. It's like, oh yeah. So her hand is drawing our attention to her covering herself, much like the modest Venus. And then you have the vertical line of the curtain also drawing our eye to her hand. All right, and then we have a lot of good techniques having contrast and balance. We don't need to write all this down, okay? The light and warm color of her body is in contrast to the dark background, so that's what's really popping her out. The composition is composed of vertical and horizontal lines, and then she and the bed is very soft and curvy. So you have these strong, sharp lines, and then the soft curviness of the female. And then this is a really good use of asymmetrical balance. So what that means is you have the bulk of her body on the left, and then very little bit of body on the right. And then you have the scene happening in the background on the right, and then you have the empty background on the left. So that's a really good example of asymmetrical balance. It is heavily weight on the left and heavily weight on the right in different ways. And strong diagonal line with the figure in the front. Done.